Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Zen the Intergalactic Ninja, brought to us by Konami. Zen was released on both the NES as well as the Nintendo Game Boy. You play as the alien ninja Zen as he tries to take out the Lord Contaminus, who is trying to pollute the Earth. The product of an era of the late 80s and early 90s where they were creating child-friendly characters to help kids learn that pollution is bad and that they should try to protect Earth. Zen was created in 1987 as a comic book. It was then later adapted not only into the video game that we're playing today, but also actually had a toy line. Surprisingly, there was no animated series for Zen, though I'm sure they wanted to create one at some point. While there are many games out there that have a very similar message, Zen the Intergalactic Ninja is actually one of the best that have an anti-pollution message for sure. So here we go with Zen the Intergalactic Ninja for the NES. When you begin the game, you can start it right up and go right into the first levels, or you can actually check out the option menu where you can select how many lives you start off with, the difficulty, which I'll be playing on the hard difficulty, and you actually have a full music and sound test, which is something that was a little uncommon for NES games, but seen mainly in later NES titles. When you start the game up, you can select from one of 4 different stages, and we're going to start off with the Toxic Factory stage. Here, basically, Zen is trying to destroy a toxic factory. He sets off bombs at the very beginning, and then has to run and escape from the area before the bombs go off. Kinda interesting that this is the way the game starts off, and this is the only level where you have a very strict time limit. The final boss of the game has something similar, but it's definitely a little different. Now the game actually starts off with kind of an isometric view as you're trying to run through all these hallways, trying to get through it as quick as possible, watching out for all the hazards, taking out the enemies, and getting out just in the nick of time. Of course, with a time limit, you're going to be wanting to rush as much as possible. Though on some of the jumping, until you get used to it, you'll have to take your time, because jumping in the game can be a little bit weird since you jump so high up in the air and kind of float for a few seconds before quickly landing down. Not surprisingly, though, there's lots of different pitfalls to fall into, there's conveyor belts to deal with, and all kinds of other stuff. There's also a big power-up in the game as well that you saw just to the left of me a little bit ago, and when you pick those up, you actually get the ability to meditate. And when you meditate in the game by pressing the select button, you actually refill all your health, which is going to be essential to beating some of the later bosses in the game, especially on the hard difficulty. On the normal or easy difficulties, they aren't as bad and you usually can defeat a boss with 1 health bar, but the later ones, you definitely need to replenish your health. This level and these types of levels in the game always kind of reminded me of Gremlins 2, the way the camera is, and a lot of the ways the controls and movement end up going. In this long hallway you're being attacked by, well, it looks like large screws as they try to come towards you. Zen actually has 2 attacks. While they both use the same button, you either attack with the bow straight out, or you use a short-range attack with a sword that can hit enemies a little bit closer to you, and does actually more damage. When you're moving forward or pressing any direction, you end up using the bow straight out, which actually takes an extra second or 2 than the normal sword swipe, and since it's less powerful, it seems like, isn't necessarily the best way to take out some enemies. During the segment with the net, you just want to make sure that you're in the blue square anytime the big giant presser is coming down. That way, of course, you don't end up getting squashed and lose a life that way. The next little segment is definitely even harder because you have to run quickly, dodge enemies, and eventually a laser will cut the platform you're standing on, causing you to fall. Now for the boss. You can attack him, of course, with both of your attacks, whether it's the bow straight out or just getting close to him and using the regular sword type swipe. He has a few different attacks. He basically sneezes and causes all this dust to fly out of him, coming towards you, which of course will damage you if it gets near you. Eventually, after dealing enough hits to him, he'll turn into a giant cloud of dust and start floating around the room that you'll also have to dodge. As soon as he reforms though, immediately start attacking him over and over again. Your goal, of course, is going to be draining his health before yours gets down. On the hard difficulty, you have very little window to dodge some of the attacks, it seems like, so it's best to just kind of get in there and attack as quickly and as fast as possible, dealing as much damage to try to drain his health bar, like I said, before yours ends up going away as well. After you're able to deliver the last hit to him, he smokes a little bit, explodes, and you're able to just barely escape the toxic factory. After completing the first and third stages, you get a bonus game where you have to knock trash back into a giant recycle machine. This is actually a lot of fun, but can be really difficult to try to perfect. Basically, trash will fall out of one of 3 openings at the top of the screen and quickly, and I mean really quickly, fall down to the bottom. You have to move back and forth and knock all the garbage into the giant recycle machine. If you're off by just a second or so, the garbage ends up hitting the ground and you won't be able to get a perfect score. The more of the bottom things you're able to fill up, the more bonuses you get, including 10,000 point bonus. You end up getting another meditation thing, a shield for the beginning of the next level, a 1-up, as well as you actually can get upgrades to your overall health bar. After completing the full level and bonus stage, we move on to the next level, selecting now the acidic forest. Now this level automatically has you jumping all the way to the top in order to enter the boss chamber right away. Now your main goal actually is also to keep the flowers alive at the bottom. However, if you're quick enough, you don't have to really worry about the flowers dying below. Basically, if all the flowers end up dying, you end up losing health very quickly, and of course that will end up causing you to lose a life and you'll have to redo the fight. Usually I like to use the one meditation they already give you and then just move close to the boss and keep attacking her over and over again. She throws out vials as well as she has poison that comes out of the top of her. Either way, I can't really dodge all the attacks, so it's best just to get in there and keep attacking over and over again. Thankfully, you get a free meditation for the fight, so be sure to use that when you get low health and just keep attacking her. If you want to bring those flowers up, you can, but you have to drop all the way back down and then attack the flower in order to revive it. Doing so, by the time you're able to get all the flowers revived and get back up to the boss at top, usually the flowers you already just saved are already dying again. After completing any 2 of the main levels of the game, you get a chase sequence where you're moving between 2 giant buildings fighting Lord Contaminus. This fight overall with him is a lot easier, of course, than the fight we'll be seeing later on in the game, with his only main attack being he throws out these things in a triangle-like pattern, then they all explode into another triangle-like pattern. This fight ends up being, of course, a lot easier than the final boss against him, and you jump between the buildings actually using a walled kick. Something that we usually and haven't seen too many times, at least on the NES. This is definitely one of the moments where the game shines with this ability, and it's one of the cool moments that you really feel like, well, a ninja. After delivering enough hits to him though, you'll end up dropping all the way back down to the ground and end up saving the kid who you were trying to free from Lord Contaminus. Of course, I've never read the comics, and I didn't have any of the action figures, so I really don't even know much of the backstory as far as the other characters, other than Zen himself. For the 3rd level, we're in a giant burning facility. Our goal here is actually to put out the fires and save the workers that are inside the factory. This ends up being probably the worst overall level, but it's not too difficult. Our main goal here, of course, is going to be freeing those workers, and to do so you need to 5 fire extinguishers. Thankfully, they're pretty out in the open and they're pretty easy to grab. When you find one, you'll actually have to press up and attack when you're near a door that's burning in order to use the fire extinguisher in order to free the guy. Be sure before going up the staircase you go all the way to the left to pick up another one of those meditations so you can refill your health if necessary, and we'll probably have to do so when we get to the boss battle. Climb up here, grabbing the first fire extinguisher along the way to free the first worker. You can only free 1 worker per fire extinguisher, so you'll have to find another one, and thankfully the next one is next to the door that you just freed the one from, and the same goes for the next couple. Here though, you'll have 2 on the left side here. What you'll have to do is grab one, go to the next burning door, then come back and grab the next one to go to the next burning door. This is the only little bit of backtracking you really have to do, and thankfully it's not far by any means. There's of course the worst thing about this level is the fire coming from the sky. Of course, every time it lands, it does a little bit of a fire spread on the ground, but even when coming down, of course, it can end up hurting you, and when you're trying to rush through this area and get through it quickly, this can be rather annoying. The other little guys, thankfully, aren't too bad, as you can actually jump over them for the most part. After jumping over a lot of the guys and making it to the next burning door, don't go down the stairs, instead keep going over to the right, jump over a few gaps, and grab the next fire extinguisher, then drop down, and free the second to last worker at the bottom. Once he's freed, then go all the way back over to the right, grab the last fire extinguisher in the level, and then start working your way back up. You'll have to go up the staircase that we saw near the 2 fire extinguishers that we had to keep going back for earlier on. Of course, there's other ways and maybe a couple other patterns you could take to actually free everyone. This just happens to be the pattern I take in order to free all the workers. With the last fire extinguisher in your hands, jump over all the fire and all the gaps along the way till you get to the next staircase and then head down there. After freeing the last worker though, don't go actually back up the stairs yet, instead head over to the right and grab an extra life. Thankfully, the game is pretty generous with the extra lives, and with all the other meditations you're able to get, you should have a good amount of lives, though I think it's really key to have the meditations over the extra lives, mainly due to the fact that you end up, of course, losing a life. The bosses will regen all their health, so you're going to want to use the meditations in order to keep your health up and to keep draining different bosses' health bars, especially the last couple of bosses that can actually heal themselves. Climbing up here, be very careful, of course, of all the rats running around, as you want to maintain as much health as possible before you make it to the top to deal with the giant toxic venom-like guy at the very top of the area. Unfortunately, we don't have much health going into the fight. He ends up hitting me and I have to heal again. Then, when you would normally attack the guy, he'll drop down to this platform down below and start bouncing around. You'll have to wait for him to reform before you're able to do any damage to him again. After delivering a couple of hits, he'll end up attacking you, but then actually turn into a weird blob into the air and try to land on top of you to deal a lot of damage to you. When he goes into the blob form, don't back away from him. Instead, go through where he was, and you should be able to avoid the blob most of the time. Just keep attacking him every time he's able to reform, and you should be able to drain all his health bar without you losing another whole set of health. After completing level 3, we move on to another bonus level. This one, once again, the same thing of knocking all the trash into the recycler. After getting most of the power-ups from the last bonus stage, I move on now to the high-speed railway stage. Now this one is another one of the ones with the isometric style view, but instead you're in a minecart as it's racing through a large set of mines trying to get to the actual boss fight of this area. There's switches along the way that you can hit, some of which doesn't matter if you end up hitting them or not, you'll just go a different path through the railway. However, some of them you do need to hit so you don't end up making it to a dead end and lose a life. Especially the last switch in the area, you definitely need to hit. Since there is a couple of paths here, this is just the path I end up taking. May not actually even be the easiest path, but it's just the one I ended up taking for this run. If you've ever played Donkey Kong Country or games like that with other minecart style levels, you should be very familiar with this style of gameplay for sure. During this segment though, you will actually have to fight a few enemies, which thankfully are very easy. They can attack, but if you do a lot of quick sword swipes, you should be able to take those guys out before they're actually able to get close to you. After you take out a few of those guys, you continue along the railway to another set of switches. Once again, I'll end up hitting the switch here to go through another set of different railways, along with actually picking up an armor. The next segment here, though, is a little bit difficult, as you'll have walls flying at you that you'll have to attack. Any wall that's not flashing, you can actually attack and do damage to. However, ones that are flashing you can't hurt, and you'll have to jump over or avoid, and they can hurt you just by running into you. If you end up missing this switch here, like I did unfortunately, you're going to have to go into this area with all this fire coming at you. This is probably the hardest part of the level, as you're doing your best to dodge all the jumping fireballs as they come towards you. Move back and forth along the track the best you can to avoid getting accidentally hit by the fireballs. You can use your jumping to your advantage to try to jump over some of the fireballs, but when you have more than one coming at you at the same time, it can be hard to jump over them. For this last switch, I have to make sure that I actually go to the right here, so that I can end up making it to the boss battle after another big jump over a gap. You'll run into a dead end, but thankfully Zen will be okay since you don't end up landing into a pit after the dead end, and now it's time for the boss fight. This guy is a huge hawking mess and can be really hard to dodge some of its attacks. he also does a lot of damage to you. Just like other bosses, my goal is going to be trying to jump over all his attacks on the left side of the screen and attack him when I get the opportunities to. After a while, he'll go under the ground and then re-emerge, and when he does, he'll start throwing barrels at you instead. You'll probably have to use one of your healings in order to actually get rid of him. Hanging on the left wall I find is the best area to try to avoid a lot of attacks, but still be able to deal some damage to him. Though, of course, there really is no safe spot for you to stand during this boss fight. After he's done, now that we've completed the first 4 main stages, we now go kind of to the final set of levels in kind of a boss rush, starting with a level that's probably the biggest pain in the whole game. In this level, you're falling and trying to avoid a giant spike wall from crushing you. Along the way, of course, enemies are going to be attacking you, and there's other things bouncing along the walls that you're going to want to avoid. Similar to Battletoads and the Rat Race level, your goal is to keep moving through all the openings and the platforms that you end up getting to, and try to quickly get down there as fast as possible before the wall ends up meeting up with you and crushing you. If you're quick enough, you'll be able to just barely survive the wall falling at you, be able to pick up some power-ups along the way, and then drop into basically the next boss fight. For this boss, you have a large river that you're going to have to keep jumping over all these gaps while dealing with this water monster. Go all the way to the right side in order to pick up a replenishment and another one of your health regens. This guy is a giant slimy mess, and he has 2 attacks. He either summons little guys to bounce around the room with you to fight you that you can destroy with your staff, or he ends up spinning a giant wave at you that ends up causing you to get knocked back and off of platforms, possibly in the pits if you're not careful. The best strategy for him is if you're not able to get an immediate attack as he's first spawning upwards, wait a second for him to start spitting out the little guys, then jump towards him and attack. If you try to jump towards him and attack him as soon as he spawns and you're not on the platform with him already, he'll just do that spit move at you and cause you to get knocked back. This is kind of a long, drawn-out fight overall, but it's not too difficult as long as you're able to take out some of the jumping guys that he ends up spawning with him. Like I said, it does take a long time, but if you're lucky, you should be able to have some health left and just barely win the fight without having to use one of your regens. After defeating the guy, you'll then move on to the next area, and it's another boss fight, this time in another isometric style view. This guy is a giant pile of junk that ends up forming into a center. This boss can be rather tricky, and it's probably the longest overall boss fight I have to deal with if you're trying to avoid wasting too many of your regens for your health. And I recommend doing this because you'll definitely want those health replenishments for the last couple of bosses. He has a few main attacks besides some laser stuff that he'll fire out that as long as you're not directly in front of it you won't get hit by. He also likes to bounce around the room, and he has a giant amount of garbage circling him, so it's hard to actually get close enough to deal damage with your staff. Every so often he'll end up breaking apart just enough to kind of throw off the remaining junk he has, and then he reforms his shield, usually right afterwards, also then starting to do the bounce around the room once again. Like I said, this is a pretty long, drawn-out fight, and it's really hard to even dodge some of his attacks during this fight, but you want to try to conserve as much health as you can. The next level that we're going to have to travel to is actually a clone boss fight. Nothing funner than a boss that ends up mimicking your every move. Of course, being exactly like you, his main attack is his staff. He can also, when you get close to one another, this weird effect happens that ends up making him into your color. I'm not sure why this happens or what it really necessarily does to him other than making him blue for a period of time until you deliver your next hit to him. The best way to deal with this guy though is using the bow throw. What you'll have to do is you'll have to attack him with the bow straight out, and then as soon as you make contact with him, press backwards on the D-pad. And when you do so, you'll end up throwing the guy, dealing a decent amount of damage to him. It may seem pretty easy at first, but this guy can regen his health. After he gets down to 3 health bars, he'll then immediately start going towards one of the health regen chambers. If you're playing on normal mode, he can actually only do this twice, but if you're playing on the hard difficulty, he can do it 3 times. So this ends up causing me to, of course, end up using one of my health regens for this fight. But the good thing is, they give you one of those during this fight. Usually I like to wait till I get down to the second time that he ends up regenning his health, then go towards that actual health regen. All the way on the right side of the room while he's regenning his health, I grab that health replenishment, throw him one time, and then use the health replenishment to refill my health bar. Once that's refilled, of course, then I continue with the throwing pattern to finally drain his health fully so that I can actually win this fight. Since he has one more regen, you have to still be very careful with this, but overall, if you get that bow throw down, it's not too bad of a fight. Once he's taken care of, it's time for the final boss fights of the game. Lord Contaminus has 2 forms. No surprise that the final boss has multiple forms. The first form though, our goal is just to straight up attack immediately. Just jump a little bit over to the right or left and then jump up in the air and keep doing the little short attack over and over again. Because his attacks actually take a few seconds to deal out, if you keep jumping, you'll keep draining his health really quickly and be able to survive his attacks just long enough in order to replenish all his health bar in order to get to the final form. Now here's where things get tricky. You'll have basically a time limit if you're not careful, because what happens is he forms rocks, and then after a few seconds the rocks end up flying towards Earth doing damage. 5% damage every rock that hits it. After of course it reaches 100%, the Earth ends up exploding and you lose a life. His other attack, of course, will be that he forms all these little things that fly over top of him and then come crashing down, landing wherever you're standing whenever they see you. Your goal mainly is to keep doing your jumping attacks to him, taking out as many of the rocks as you can so that they don't end up attacking Earth, while also, of course, doing your damage to Lord Contaminus. If you have 2 health regens, you should be okay, as you jumping around should avoid at least a few attacks now and then. Now of course he can do his health regen during this fight, and just like the other guy, he normally only does it twice on normal difficulty, but can do it 3 times on the hard difficulty. Of course, if you're gonna use the health regen, you're gonna wanna wait for an opening to do it in between the rocks flying at the planet, because of course when you regen your health, it takes a few seconds, and then he doesn't stop attacking during that time. Here, I end up using the attack in between him throwing the rocks at the planet, so I'm able to get back up before he's able to launch out any more rocks. In this case, he ends up healing during that time, so it kind of works out that we both heal during the same turn. After he ends up regenerating his health a few times, eventually though, you'll be able to drain the rest of his health and complete the game, sit back and enjoy the ending to Zen the Intergalactic Ninja. So there you have it, a nice little short ending, but of course signifies that Lord Contaminants is dead, but our job is never done because someone will always try to pollute the planet, right? Either way, Zen the Intergalactic Ninja is actually a really fun game. It has a good soundtrack, good gameplay, and of course being from the Konami, it's no surprise that it would end up being a pretty solid game. Unfortunately, the game was only released in North America, which also limited it greatly the amount of people that were able to play it back in the day. Released in 1993, being so late in the NES life, it's no surprise that a lot of people don't remember it. Which is unfortunate because Konami definitely put some effort into the game, especially also in the soundtrack department. As the credits wrap up, you get to see Zen the Intergalactic Ninja, copyright Konami 93. Then you get to see the entire cast of Zen the Intergalactic Ninja all shouting out Eco Power, which I guess was their catchphrase. And you also get to see all the other characters that are part of the Zen the Intergalactic Ninja toy line and comic books, that some of which didn't make any kind of appearance during the video game. But either way, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.